Unaware he inherited the company her lover worked for, Madison Reeves spat on her poor husband at a crowded family dinner, calling him worthless in front of everyone. Her laughter loud, her arrogance louder. But what she didn't know was that the man she mocked in public silently owned the very empire her lover depended on for his paycheck. The chandeliers shimmered above the mahogany table as she leaned into her new fiancé, Tyler, boasting of success bought with borrowed pride, while her husband, Lucas Grant, sat in quiet restraint, the kind that hides storms behind still waters. Every eye at the table saw a broken man, but none saw the signature that controlled their family's fate resting beneath his name. How could a woman so proud not know she was spitting on the man who owned her world? Why did Lucas remain silent when he could have destroyed them all with a single word? And when that silence finally ends, what will be left of the woman who thought she'd already won? The laughter that filled the Reeves dining room that evening had a hollow echo, like music played in a room where someone was quietly bleeding. The mahogany table stretched long enough to host arrogance itself. Polished silver, crystal glasses, and a chandelier whose brilliance seemed to mock the man sitting silently at the end. Lucas Grant kept his eyes on the flame of the candle before him, watching how it trembled when someone spoke too loud. His suit was neat but modest, the kind worn by a man who had stopped trying to prove anything. Across the table, Madison, his wife of 7 years, though she now introduced herself only as Madison Reeves, leaned into her new fiancé, Tyler Cross. Her laughter carried the brittle confidence of someone who needed to be heard to feel powerful. Tyler whispered something about some men not knowing how to provide, and the table erupted again. Madison tilted her wine glass, her manicured fingers reflecting the chandelier's glow as she said, "Well, Tyler doesn't have to prove anything. Some people just succeed." Her mother nodded approvingly. Her father smirked. Lucas smiled faintly, not out of politeness but out of disbelief. Not at their cruelty, but at how familiar it had become. His gaze drifted toward Madison's hand, noticing the engagement ring that had once been his grandmother's diamond. He'd seen it in their anniversary photos. Now it glittered on another man's promise. For a fleeting moment, his mind wandered back to the day that ring first found her finger. The memory hit like a scent you can't unremember. The ocean wind of Miami, her hair whipping in the breeze, laughter unrestrained. They'd eaten street tacos that day, sharing one napkin, her head resting on his shoulder as she'd whispered, "As long as we have love, we'll never need wealth." He'd believed her. He'd believed every word. "Lucas," Madison said suddenly, drawing every eye to him, "do you ever miss ambition? Or did you trade that in for peace?" The sarcasm wrapped around her words like perfume. He lifted his head slowly, meeting her gaze. "Peace is expensive. Some people never afford it," he said quietly. She smirked, swirling her wine. "You'd know all about expensive things, wouldn't you? I mean, you used to." The laughter around the table returned, louder this time, feeding off her cruelty. He said nothing, though her voice stabbed deeper with each passing second. Madison's father, Henry Reeves, glanced at him with the smugness of a man who'd once borrowed from Grant Holdings decades ago, a secret Lucas never revealed. His mother-in-law, Ruth, nodded with thinly veiled disdain, unaware that her retirement fund rested on the dividends of the very empire she mocked. When Lucas didn't respond, Madison leaned closer, voice dripping with the venom of familiarity. "Look at you, sitting there like a ghost. You're worthless now, Lucas, a burden dressed in nostalgia." The air shifted. Forks froze midair. Tyler chuckled, pretending it was harmless fun, but the sound died quickly when Lucas looked at him. Not with anger, but with the kind of calm that unnerves men who depend on power to feel tall. Madison's father cleared his throat, trying to steer the tension away. "Well, we can't all marry into success, eh, son?" Lucas's eyes moved from one face to another, each a mirror of arrogance he'd once mistaken for family. He picked up his napkin, set it gently beside his plate, and stood. "You're right," he said softly. "Not everyone marries into success. Some are just born into it." Before anyone could process his words, Madison sneered. "Oh, please, born into what? Poverty? Then, as if to punctuate the moment, she spat near his plate, a sharp, deliberate act that silenced the room completely. The sound of it, wet, final, echoed louder than any insult. Tyler tried to laugh it off. "Babe, don't," Lucas said, his tone still calm but deep enough to freeze the room. He looked at Madison, the woman he'd once promised everything to, and for the first time, there was nothing in his eyes. No love, no pain, just quiet. "You always did confuse gentleness for weakness." He turned toward the exit. Every step he took was deliberate, soundless against the marble floor. Her family watched him go, unsure whether to gloat or feel the weight of something irreversible. Outside, the night air met him like an old friend. He walked to his car, parked beneath the streetlight, and leaned against the door. His breath came slow, steady, until it didn't. The first tear slid down his cheek, uninvited. He wasn't crying for her words. He was crying for the absurdity of it all, that the same people laughing inside that house lived on salaries signed under his family's name. He looked up at the night sky, the city lights flickering like embers of memory. His father's words returned from a long-ago conversation. "Power doesn't always roar, son. Sometimes it just waits." The memory deepened. He saw his father's office, the scent of bourbon and oak, Richard Grant's weary eyes the night he signed his will. "Never fight to prove your worth," he'd said. "Those who doubt it aren't worth convincing." Lucas had nodded then, too young to understand what kind of wars patience wins. Now he did. He wiped his face, opened his car door, and drove back to the penthouse he'd kept hidden since the estate settlement. The elevator chimed softly as it opened to the vast, glass-walled space overlooking the city. He walked straight to the portrait of his father above the fireplace. Richard Grant, founder of Grant Holdings. "I kept quiet like you taught me," Lucas murmured. His voice cracked slightly. "But patience has expired." He pulled out his phone and dialed. "Harold," he said when the familiar voice answered. "It's time. I want every division of Grant Holdings restructured, all assets, all authority, back under my name." A pause, then Harold's voice, calm and measured. "Are you certain, Lucas? Once we sign this, there's no turning back." Lucas stared at his reflection in the glass. A man reborn through restraint. "I've already turned back for years. Now I'm walking forward." He ended the call and stood before his father's portrait again. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we begin." Behind him, the city glowed, unaware that before dawn, its balance of power would shift quietly, forever. The next morning arrived with a kind of quiet that felt deliberate, as though the city itself knew something was about to change. Sunlight spilled through the glass walls of Lucas Grant's study, stretching across the polished floor and illuminating the framed blueprints of Grant Holdings that hung like silent witnesses of legacy. The city moved outside, unaware that its pulse was still tied to the pen of the man the world believed broken. Harold Grant, his father's oldest friend, lawyer, and the last keeper of secrets, entered the room holding a brown leather case. His silver hair caught the light as he placed a thick stack of documents on the desk. The sound they made was heavy, final. "Everything's ready," he said. Lucas stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the skyline. "How long has it been since the board thought I'd stepped away?" 3 years, Harold said quietly. "Long enough for them to grow comfortable, but not long enough to forget your name." Lucas nodded slowly. "Good." He sat, and the chair creaked softly, a sound that carried the weight of endings. The papers before him were legal arteries connecting every branch of his father's empire. With every stroke of his pen, power began to flow back to its origin. Grant Holdings, Grant Logistics, Grant Finance, all the subsidiaries he'd silently let others manage while he pretended to live as a failure, now bent back to his will. Harold watched him sign each page, his expression unreadable. When Lucas reached the final document, he paused. The fountain pen hovered just above the line. "Once this is done," Harold said carefully, "there's no undoing it. The board will lose their freedom. Madison's family, her lover, they'll feel it too. This won't just be business, Lucas. It'll be blood." Lucas looked up, meeting Harold's eyes. "You were there the night my father died," he said. "Do you remember what he told you?" Harold exhaled. He said, "Don't let my son lose his kindness." Lucas's gaze softened, but only for a heartbeat. Then he should have lived to see what kindness cost me. He signed the page. The pen pressed so firmly that the ink bled slightly through the paper. Outside, a flock of pigeons scattered from a nearby rooftop. The city kept moving, but somewhere beneath the surface, its current shifted direction. Harold closed the folder carefully, his expression half pride, half sorrow. "It's done," he said. Lucas leaned back, his voice quiet but resolute. "No, Harold, it's begun." The old man hesitated by the door. "What will you do first?" "Nothing," Lucas replied. "The world will announce it for me." And it did. By noon, a ripple of confusion spread across boardrooms and conference calls across Atlanta. Internal memos went out. Executives whispered. A single email sent from Grant Holdings headquarters carried one subject line: corporate restructuring notice, effective immediately. Under it, Lucas's signature. Phones buzzed, screens lit up. Harold's assistants fielded calls from journalists and CEOs desperate for confirmation. Some laughed it off. "The man's broke," they said. Others grew silent, realizing how little they'd ever known about the Grants. By evening, social media headlines began surfacing. Mysterious reshuffle at Grant Holdings. Who is Lucas Grant? Former heir reclaims empire in silent coup. Lucas watched the coverage unfold from his office, unmoved. He wasn't seeking attention. He was setting equilibrium. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Samantha, his executive assistant. "Sir, a woman named Madison Reeves has requested an urgent meeting with Mr. Grant, the new majority owner of Grant Holdings. She and her fiancé insist it's regarding a potential investment partnership." Lucas's thumb hovered over the screen, his pulse steady. For a moment, the irony nearly drew a smile. Madison, the woman who spat near his plate less than 24 hours ago, now wanted a meeting with Mr. Grant, the faceless power she believed could save her fiancé's struggling company. He typed slowly. "Set it for tomorrow morning." Then after a pause added, "Make sure they're not kept waiting." He placed the phone down, exhaling. His reflection stared back from the glass table, faint and distant. Harold entered again, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. "She reached out already?" he asked, handing one over. Lucas nodded. "Fate doesn't waste time." Harold studied him for a moment. "You're certain you can face her without emotion?" Lucas's eyes remained fixed on the skyline. "Emotion built this empire once. Logic will rebuild it now." A brief silence passed before Harold spoke again, softer this time. "She doesn't know, does she?" "No," Lucas said. "Not yet." The city glimmered beneath them, unaware that in less than 24 hours, arrogance would meet its reckoning inside the same building where fortunes were made and lives undone. Later that night, long after Harold had gone, Lucas remained at his desk. The hum of the city filled the silence. He opened his father's old watch case. Inside was the timepiece Richard Grant wore the day he signed his first company charter. It had stopped at 11:47 p.m., the night before his death. Lucas wound it slowly, listening as it ticked back to life. "Tomorrow," he whispered again, setting it on the desk beside the signed documents. "We finish what you started." Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, soft and low, like applause from the heavens for a man who had waited too long to stand. The morning broke bright over Atlanta, the kind of deceptive sunlight that pretends to bless what it's about to expose. The marble lobby of Grant Holdings gleamed like it had been polished for Judgment Day. Receptionists whispered in low tones, the air heavy with something they couldn't name but everyone could feel. A quiet anticipation, like thunder before the rain. Madison Reeves walked in first, her heels clicking across the marble, each step dripping with confidence that was already cracking. She wore a pearl-white suit, the kind meant to command respect, her perfume trailing arrogance behind her. Tyler followed, his tailored navy suit sharp, but his eyes restless, scanning the architecture as though the building itself might recognize him. He adjusted his cufflinks, muttering, "Let's make this quick. We have the upper hand." Madison smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. We always do." Employees glanced up from their desks, pretending to type as the infamous couple passed. Some of them had seen Lucas Grant's photo in archived press releases. The lost heir, the quiet son of Richard Grant, but few had ever met him. When Madison brushed past them, she didn't see the stares of those who knew the truth. She only saw herself reflected in the marble walls, flawless, superior, untouchable. They reached the top floor. The assistant outside the executive suite, Samantha, greeted them with professional restraint. "Mr. Grant will see you shortly." Tyler nodded, placing a hand on Madison's lower back, his voice casual. "Please let him know we're on a tight schedule." Samantha's smile didn't falter. "Mr. Grant doesn't keep anyone waiting long." The elevator doors closed behind them with a soft chime. Madison exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the nerves that had begun to creep in. She didn't know why, but the air up here felt heavier, richer somehow, like the oxygen cost more. When the door opened, the sound of her laughter died mid-breath. Lucas Grant sat behind the broad mahogany desk, sunlight catching on the glass nameplate that read, "Lucas R. Grant, Chairman and CEO." For a full 5 seconds, time didn't move. Madison froze in the doorway, color draining from her face. Tyler glanced between them, confusion knitting his brow. Lucas didn't stand. He didn't smile. He simply folded his hands and said, with terrifying calm, "You're late." Tyler blinked. "We're here to see Mr. Grant." Lucas's gaze didn't waver. "You already are." The silence that followed was the kind that strips a person down to truth. Madison's breath hitched, her pulse hammering against her throat. Tyler's mouth fell open. "Wait, you're the CEO?" Lucas's tone was measured, the voice of a man who'd learned that quiet control unnerves louder men. "Majority owner and chairman, actually. Please sit." They obeyed without realizing it. Madison lowered herself slowly, her trembling fingers clutching the edge of the chair. Lucas's eyes found hers, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just with a calm that felt colder than revenge. He opened the folder before him and glanced over the proposal they'd submitted through intermediaries. A funding request from Cross-Build Associates, Tyler's construction firm, struggling under debt and unpaid contracts. His lips curved slightly. "So this is what you wanted from Mr. Grant, a rescue." Tyler swallowed. "We believe the company's investment could—" Lucas raised a hand, stopping him. "You believe the company's investment could fund the same lifestyle that led you here. I've read your financials." He turned to Madison. "And I recognize several familiar transactions, including a personal transfer labeled rent reimbursement." Her throat went dry. "That's not necessary to explain," Lucas interrupted softly. "Numbers tell their own stories." For a moment, only the faint hum of the air conditioning filled the room. Then he spoke again, each word precise, deliberate. "Your proposal is declined." Tyler shifted forward. "Declined?" "Mr. Grant, we came in good faith." "I don't invest in people who spit on me," Lucas said. His voice didn't rise, but the sentence hit harder than any shout could. Madison's eyes glistened, her words trembling. "You can't be serious." "I can," Lucas replied. "And I am." He leaned back in his chair. "Do you know what irony is, Madison? It's watching people beg for favor from the very man they humiliated for being poor." He turned his gaze toward Tyler. "And it's realizing that the company your career depends on, the one paying your staff, your projects, your life, has been mine all along." Tyler's hands tightened on his knees. "You're bluffing." Lucas pressed a button on the desk. Samantha entered with a stack of documents. "Employment rosters and contract records," she said, placing them before him. Lucas slid one across the table. "Your signature," he said, "under Grant Holdings subsidiary, Arcadia Developments, the company you thought you owned." Tyler's eyes flicked to the page and froze. His signature sat beneath Lucas's letterhead. He looked up, face draining of color. Madison's voice cracked. You planned this?" Lucas shook his head. "No, you did." He opened another file. "Henry and Ruth Reeves, your parents, have both been listed as senior advisors in Grant Holdings Community Division for over 20 years. Effective immediately, their contracts have been terminated, With full severance, of course. They deserve better than what you've made them a part of. Madison stood abruptly, tears burning behind her eyes. You can't fire them. Lucas's tone softened, almost kind. I can, and I did. She stared at him, trembling. You'll regret this. His voice was calm, almost tired. I already did, for years. Security entered quietly, responding to Samantha's subtle nod. As they escorted Madison and Tyler toward the elevator, Lucas remained seated, his eyes distant. He didn't watch them go. He only stared out the glass wall overlooking the city, the skyline reflecting off the surface of his desk like a mirror of fate. Outside, the elevator descended in silence. Madison's chest heaved as she gripped Tyler's arm. He's not the same man, she whispered. Tyler's voice was low, shaking. No, he's the man we made. Back upstairs, Lucas stood and walked toward the window. The morning light washed over him, painting his reflection in gold. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him still wished the story had ended differently, that patience hadn't needed to become punishment. But then he remembered the dinner table, the spit, the laughter, the silence. He closed his eyes, whispering to himself, mercy belongs to those who never mistake it for weakness. Below, the city thrived, unaware that its balance of power had just shifted again, not through violence, but through quiet justice. 2 weeks passed, but the echo of that meeting refused to fade. Word of Madison Reeves' humiliation spread across Atlanta's corporate and social circles with the precision of a well-aimed rumor. Nobody could say who started it. Some claimed an assistant whispered it over lunch. Others swore an investor leaked the truth. But by the end of the week, everyone knew. The woman who once spat on her husband had begged him for a deal, unaware he was her boss. The gossip traveled fast, faster than any press release. It seeped into boardrooms, charity dinners, and group chats, leaving behind silence and smirks whenever Madison's name surfaced. People no longer greeted her with admiration. They greeted her with curiosity, the kind that cuts deeper than hatred, the kind that watches a downfall like a show. At first, Madison tried to ignore it. She told herself it was envy, the way people always resented beauty and success. She kept her chin high, her smile practiced. But reality has a way of stripping illusions layer by layer. Calls from clients began to slow. Invitations to social events stopped arriving. Brands she endorsed postponed partnerships without explanation. It was during one of those quiet afternoons that her phone buzzed with a message from her publicist. Damage control no longer effective. You've been removed from the board at Lux Initiative. She read it twice before her hand began to shake. Removed, she whispered, eyes wide. Tyler entered the room moments later, tossing his phone onto the table. Investors pulled out again, he said. His voice was sharp, his tone frayed. 3 contracts canceled in 24 hours. Someone's pulling strings, Madison. This isn't bad luck. It's surgical. She looked up, trembling. You think it's Lucas? Who else? He barked. You humiliated him. You made a scene in front of everyone. What did you expect? Flowers? Madison's eyes welled up. He wouldn't do this. He's not like that. Tyler's laugh was hollow. You don't know him anymore. You made sure of that. The words hit harder than the anger behind them. Madison turned away, staring at the rain sliding down the window pane. She remembered the night she'd mocked him, the look in his eyes. Not fury, but restraint. The same restraint that once made her feel safe. Now it terrified her. By evening, another blow arrived. Financial tabloids lit up with headlines. Grant Holdings cuts ties with cross-billed associates amid alleged ethical misconduct. Tyler read the article aloud, his voice trembling with rage. He's accusing me of fraud. Fraud! He slammed the laptop shut. That man's trying to destroy me. Madison's hands trembled as she reached for the device, reopening the page. But the more she read, the more her chest tightened. The article didn't mention Lucas by name, but everyone knew. The phrasing was deliberate. Internal investigation, undisclosed conflicts of interest, inappropriate transfers. She recognized her own financial transactions buried in those words, dressed in legal discretion. He's not destroying you, she said quietly. He's erasing us. That night, Tyler stayed out drinking, leaving her alone in their penthouse. The silence pressed against her ribs like guilt. She poured herself a glass of wine, but it didn't taste like relief. It tasted like consequence. For the first time in years, she scrolled through old photos. Her and Lucas at the beach, at his father's gala, standing beside the ribbon he cut when Grant Holdings opened a new branch. He'd looked at her then, the way people look at something sacred. Now even the memory felt like theft. Down in the heart of the city, Lucas stood in his office, surrounded by the hum of servers and quiet conversations. Samantha handed him the latest report, a detailed financial analysis showing the collapse of Cross-Build Associates. "They're bleeding funds," she said softly. Lucas nodded. "Let them." Harold entered moments later, watching him in silence. "You've done it," he said. "Every move precise, every thread pulled. She'll have nothing left by the end of the month." Lucas turned toward the window. The skyline glittered like gold dipped in glass, indifferent and eternal. "It's not about taking everything," he said. "It's about balance. She built her power on deceit. I'm just restoring gravity." Harold studied him, eyes full of quiet worry. "And when gravity finishes its work?" Lucas exhaled slowly. "Then silence will finish what justice started." As the night deepened, thunder rolled distantly, the same rhythm that had followed him since the night he walked out of that dinner. He remembered his father's voice again. Sometimes the cruelest punishment isn't wrath, but absence. The next morning, Madison woke to a flood of missed calls. Her phone buzzed with notifications, clients, banks, even her parents. Her mother's message was short and trembling. "We've been terminated, Madison. We don't know why. We trusted you." She sank to the floor, the phone slipping from her hand. For the first time, the tears came. Not for her reputation, not for her wealth, but for the realization that Lucas hadn't shouted, hadn't exposed her. He'd simply removed himself, and the world followed. Across town, Lucas closed his laptop, unread emails piling in. He didn't need to see the chaos. He'd already seen it coming. He walked toward the portrait of his father and adjusted the frame slightly. "It's done," he whispered. But even as he said it, something in him shifted. Not satisfaction, not regret, but a quiet awareness that revenge, like wealth, always costs something. He looked out over the city again, watching the clouds gather. In the distance, a storm brewed, promising that the story between him and Madison wasn't over yet. The storm arrived before dawn, washing over Atlanta with the kind of rain that felt personal. Madison Reeves sat by the window of her penthouse, her reflection ghosting against the glass as lightning streaked the sky. Her eyes were swollen from a night without sleep. The city lights blurred beneath the rain, and for the first time in her adult life, the skyline didn't feel like power. It felt like judgment. The television in the background murmured with breaking news. Cross-Build Associates under investigation for financial misconduct. Tyler Cross facing allegations of forged documentation. Sources within Grant Holdings have declined to comment. The words tumbled together until they no longer sounded real. Madison turned the volume off, gripping her knees. When Tyler stormed through the door an hour later, soaked and furious, she didn't even flinch. His tie hung loose, his eyes bloodshot. "He's finished me," he spat. "You hear me, Madison? Lucas has destroyed everything." She looked at him numbly. "What happened? What happened?" He laughed bitterly. "He leaked internal audits. Anonymous tip, sent directly to the state regulatory board. They're freezing our accounts. He's using the same paperwork I signed under his damn subsidiaries." He slammed his fist against the wall. "He's cornered me like a dog." Madison stood slowly, voice trembling. "Tyler, calm down. We'll fix this." "Fix it?" He turned on her, his face contorted with rage. "You think I can fix federal fraud charges? You think I can fix Lucas Grant?" The silence that followed was heavy. She opened her mouth but couldn't speak. Tyler began pacing. "You told me he was finished, that he had nothing left. You told me he was done." His voice cracked, echoing through the empty penthouse. Madison's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know." "Didn't know?" He grabbed a nearby glass and hurled it against the floor. It shattered, wine splattering across the marble like blood. "You didn't know you were humiliating a man who owns the very air you breathe?" You didn't know your poor husband was sitting on an empire? Her voice broke into a whisper. I loved him once, Tyler scoffed. Yeah? Well, congratulations. Now he loves your destruction. He snatched his keys off the counter and stormed toward the door. You brought this on both of us. I'm not going down with you. Tyler, she cried, reaching out, but he was gone before her voice caught the second syllable. The sound of the slamming door echoed through the penthouse like the end of a sentence she didn't want to read. She stood there trembling, staring at the empty hallway. Lightning flashed outside, throwing her reflection against the glass again. A woman in ruins dressed like success. In another part of the city, Lucas sat in his office, the rain tapping rhythmically against the window. Harold stood by his desk reviewing the latest reports. Tyler Cross has been officially charged, Harold said quietly. Forgery, falsified documentation, and contract tampering. The SEC's involved now. Lucas didn't react. He simply poured himself a cup of black coffee. The same documents he used to inflate profits? Harold nodded. Exactly. The ones you buried years ago. I buried them, Lucas said, to protect Madison's reputation. He sipped the coffee, his gaze distant. Now I'm just uncovering what time tried to forget. Harold hesitated. She'll be ruined when this breaks. Lucas set the cup down. She already is. But as he spoke the words, a faint tremor passed through his chest. Not pity, not longing, just a flicker of memory. He saw her face the night they'd moved into their first apartment. She'd stood barefoot in the kitchen, unpacking plates, laughing about the future. We'll build something that lasts, she'd said. He'd smiled then, believing love was enough to build anything. Now he wasn't sure if anything ever truly lasted. By afternoon, social media erupted. News outlets posted images of Tyler escorted out of his firm by federal agents. His name trended for all the wrong reasons. Madison watched the footage from her couch, knees drawn to her chest. The cameras flashed, the reporters shouted, and somewhere deep inside, she knew. This was the echo of her own actions. Her phone buzzed again. Her mother this time. She didn't answer. She couldn't face another voice telling her what she already knew. Instead, she stared at the wall across from her, the one where she'd once hung a photo of her and Lucas at a gala. The photo was gone now, the outline of its frame faint against the paint. It looked like a wound that never closed. That evening, Lucas attended a quiet board meeting. Executives congratulated him on the acquisition of Crossbuild's remaining assets, praising his precision. You've taken control of the market, one said. Clean sweep. Lucas only nodded. He didn't correct them. This wasn't victory. It was consequence. After the meeting, he remained alone in the empty boardroom, staring out at the storm-soaked city. His reflection stared back, calm, polished, untouchable. But beneath that reflection lived a truth no one else saw. He wasn't destroying Madison out of anger. He was teaching her the cost of betrayal. He picked up his phone, opening an old message thread. The last text from her still sat there. We'll talk later, okay? I'm just tired. That was months ago, the day she'd first started drifting away. He never replied. He wished he had. Down in her penthouse, Madison sat on the floor with a bottle of wine and an unpaid stack of bills. Her mascara streaked, her phone dead. For the first time, she whispered his name, not as an insult, but as a prayer. Lucas! Outside, thunder answered her instead. And in his office, as the rain slowed and the clouds began to clear, Lucas whispered into the quiet room, almost as if he heard her from miles away. Patience is over, but mercy isn't. The storm eased, but the silence it left behind carried more weight than any roar could. Both of them felt it, the slow, painful pull of unfinished business. Somewhere between justice and heartbreak, the story was still being written. The night of the gala arrived like a reckoning dressed in elegance. The ballroom of the Grant Holdings Tower shimmered beneath cascading chandeliers, each crystal fragment scattering light across the polished marble floor. Guests in tailored suits and jeweled gowns filled the hall, the air thick with laughter, ambition, and the scent of power. Reporters lined the edges, their cameras ready to capture another celebration of wealth and generosity. Lucas Grant stood at the center of it all, Composed, unreadable, his tuxedo fitted with the quiet precision of a man who no longer needed to prove he belonged. The charity banners read, Grant Foundation for Renewal and Hope, a new branch dedicated to helping victims of financial ruin and betrayal. Irony dressed as philanthropy. But tonight wasn't about irony. It was about balance. Harold Grant moved beside him, voice low. Everything's set. Press is briefed. You'll speak at 9. Lucas nodded. Good. Let's keep it short. As he adjusted his cufflinks, his eyes drifted across the ballroom. The crowd of Atlanta's elite, many of whom had once turned their backs on him when Madison left. Now they watched him with reverence, unaware that he carried no satisfaction in their praise. He had learned long ago that applause was just noise. Peace was silence. But silence rarely lasted long. Near the entrance, murmurs began to ripple. Heads turned. A woman in a black dress had stepped into the ballroom, her hair slightly undone, her expression caught between defiance and despair. Madison Reeves. The cameras found her instantly. Flashbulbs popped like gunfire. Her appearance alone was scandal enough, her reputation already shredded by whispers of arrogance, betrayal, and humiliation. But there she was, walking toward the stage as if she belonged, ignoring the stares that followed. Should I stop her? Harold asked under his breath. Lucas's eyes never left her. No, let her through. The music faltered briefly, the violins losing rhythm as the crowd parted for her. Madison's heels clicked against the marble, each step echoing louder than the last. When she reached him, she didn't stop. You think this is justice? She said, her voice trembling just enough to betray the anger beneath. You think humiliating me makes you powerful? The crowd fell silent. Every lens turned. Lucas didn't move. Madison, he said evenly, this isn't about humiliation. It's about truth. She laughed bitterly, the sound brittle. Truth? You've destroyed me. You've taken everything. My family, my career, my name. You call that truth? He met her gaze, his calm unsettling in its steadiness. No, Madison, I didn't take anything. I simply stopped protecting what you were never grateful for. Her lip trembled. You think money makes you moral? You think being powerful gives you the right to play God? Lucas stepped closer, his voice low but clear enough for every microphone nearby. Money doesn't erase weakness, but it does reveal who stands beside you when you're weak. A quiet gasp rippled through the audience. Madison blinked rapidly, her poise faltering. For the first time she looked around, at the same people who once adored her, now whispering behind raised glasses. Tyler lingered near the back of the ballroom, pale and cornered, watching everything crumble. Do you know what hurts most? Lucas continued, his tone softening. It isn't that you betrayed me. It's that you never understood what you already had. Her voice cracked. You think I don't regret it? Regret? He studied her face, searching for something. Remorse, recognition, maybe both. Regret is when you spill wine on silk. What you did was bleed me dry and laugh while I watched. She flinched. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the weight of revelation. Cameras clicked. The audience stood frozen, watching as their picture-perfect illusion of Madison Reeves shattered before them. Lucas, she whispered, please, not like this, not in front of everyone. But he wasn't cruel. He didn't raise his voice or smirk in triumph. He simply turned to the crowd and said, Ladies and gentlemen, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning. And tonight, this foundation stands for those who've lost everything, even themselves. Applause began, slowly, uncertainly at first, then growing stronger. Madison stood there trembling, tears streaking her mascara as Lucas walked away from her, leaving her standing beneath the bright lights she once loved. Tyler tried to approach, but the guards blocked him. He turned away ashamed, disappearing into the crowd like a ghost who knew he no longer belonged to the living. Madison's breath came in short, broken gasps. Her world, built on appearance, pride, and pretense, had just collapsed in front of every camera in the city. Yet what hurt most wasn't the loss of status. It was the look on Lucas's face, that quiet mercy she didn't deserve but still found in his eyes. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. He simply left her standing under the chandelier, its light flickering across her tears like shattered glass. When the crowd dispersed, reporters swarmed her, shouting questions. She said nothing. The noise drowned into a distant hum as she turned toward the exit, her heels slipping on the marble. For the first time, Madison Reeves, once the woman who could command a room, looked small beneath the grandeur she used to own. From the balcony above, Lucas watched in silence. Harold stood beside him, saying nothing. "She came here looking for war," Harold finally murmured. Lucas's eyes followed her retreating figure. "No," he said quietly. "She came looking for forgiveness. She just doesn't know it yet." Down below, Madison reached the doors and hesitated, turning back one last time. Their eyes met across the ballroom, one filled with heartbreak, the other with resolve. Then she was gone. The applause faded, the lights dimmed, and the night carried on. But something inside both of them had shifted again. The battle was over, yet neither felt victorious. In the silence that followed, Lucas whispered under his breath, "The hardest part of revenge is realizing it doesn't heal you." The morning after the gala dawned in silence. For once, the city didn't roar. It whispered. The world that had once moved around Madison Reeves had suddenly learned to live without her. The newspapers hit the stands before sunrise, each headline colder than the last. Madison Reeves confronts ex-husband Lucas Grant in shocking public scene. Grant's quiet revenge. CEO's former wife faces financial collapse. From grace to scandal, the fall of Madison Reeves. She sat at her dining table, surrounded by unopened envelopes, overdue bills, foreclosure warnings, and termination letters. Her phone had stopped ringing. The silence wasn't peace, it was punishment. The mansion felt larger now, its emptiness loud. The housekeepers had quit, the driver hadn't returned since the previous week, and the last thing she'd sold, a sapphire necklace Lucas once gifted her, had barely covered the last month's utilities. She stared at her reflection in the cold black of her coffee. The woman who looked back wasn't Madison Reeves, the socialite. She wasn't the adored wife or the glamorous investor. She was someone stripped of identity, haunted by echoes of laughter that used to fill these halls. When the doorbell rang, she hesitated, heart thudding. For a moment, hope flared. Maybe it was her mother, maybe an old friend, someone still loyal. But when she opened the door, a man in a charcoal suit stood beneath the gray morning light, holding a white envelope embossed with the Grant Holdings seal. "Delivery for Ms. Madison Reeves," he said professionally, handing it over. She took it with trembling fingers. "Who sent this?" He nodded once. "Mr. Grant." Her lips parted, but no words came. She closed the door softly, her heartbeat echoing in the quiet house. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. She stared at it for a long time, her pulse unsteady. Then slowly, she tore it open. And inside was a single typed letter on crisp stationery. She read aloud, voice faltering with every word. "Effective immediately, all assets, investments, and properties under joint contractual engagement are to be repossessed to satisfy outstanding debts owed to Grant Holdings and its affiliates. This includes your residence, vehicles, and liquid accounts under review." Her eyes froze on the signature at the bottom. L. Grant. Beneath it, in pen, was a handwritten note. "You taught me that loyalty is weakness. I'm simply returning the lesson." The letter slipped from her hand and floated to the floor, landing face up. She sank to her knees, the paper crumpling beneath her palm. The air seemed to thin. "He wouldn't," she whispered. "He couldn't." But deep down, she knew. Outside, the wind howled faintly against the windows, like an echo of laughter from another life. Tyler's voice broke the silence. He'd come in through the back door, his face drawn, his shirt untucked. "They froze my accounts," he said flatly. "Every one of them." Madison turned toward him, her voice small. "Lucas sent—" "I know what he sent," Tyler snapped. "You pushed him too far, Madison. He's destroyed us." "He loved me," she screamed, the words cracking midair. "He'd never—" Her voice faltered, because even as she said it, she remembered that night at the dinner table. His silence, his restraint. He hadn't raised his voice then either. He didn't need to. Tyler laughed bitterly. You think love makes people merciful? You humiliated a man who built empires and you thought he'd just fade away? Madison shook her head. We can fix this. He cut her off, eyes cold. You can't fix what's already been written in ink. When he left, she didn't follow. The sound of his car tearing down the driveway was the last familiar noise in her life. She stood in the hallway, staring at the empty space he left behind. In her hand, the letter trembled. She pressed it to her chest as tears spilled down her cheeks. Not for the loss of wealth or status, but for the man she'd broken long before he ever fought back. Miles away, in the upper floor of Grant Holdings, Lucas sat behind his desk, a single envelope missing from the stack before him. Harold entered quietly. It's done, he said. The transfer papers are filed. The repossession is complete. Lucas didn't look up from the city below. Did she receive it? Harold nodded. Half an hour ago. Lucas was silent for a long time. Finally, he said softly, She'll understand one day. This wasn't revenge. It was the truth catching up. Harold hesitated. You still care? Lucas's gaze didn't waver. Care doesn't vanish. It just stops protecting what destroys it. When Harold left, Lucas leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The rain had returned, light and rhythmic against the windows. He thought of her, not the woman at the dinner table, but the one who'd once kissed him goodnight in a one-bedroom apartment, whispering promises of forever. He reached for the pen on his desk, tapping it gently against his palm. You said love would survive anything, he murmured to himself. You were half right. That night, Madison packed her last suitcase under the dim glow of a single lamp. The mansion was no longer hers. It never had been. She paused at the door, taking one last look at the empty house, the symbol of everything she'd gained and lost. When she stepped into the rain, it felt like the world was washing her clean, drop by drop. For the first time, there was no arrogance left, no pretense, no mask, only truth, raw and quiet. Back in his penthouse, Lucas watched the storm from his balcony. Somewhere across the city, he knew she was reading that letter again, seeing her reflection in every decision she'd made. He closed his eyes, letting the rain touch his skin. Justice had been served, but peace was something else entirely. And though neither of them could admit it, they both still longed for it in the silence that followed. Autumn arrived softly, painting Atlanta in shades of gold and remorse. The city had moved on, but its whispers hadn't. Stories of Madison Reeves's fall from grace had faded from headlines, but remained alive in conversations that began with, "Remember her?" People always remember tragedy more than triumph. In the corner office of Grant Holdings Tower, Lucas Grant stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass, the skyline stretching endlessly beneath him. The name Grant Foundation for Renewal and Hope now gleamed across the neighboring building. His newest endeavor, born not from pride but repentance. It had grown quickly, funding housing programs, scholarships, and small business grants. To the world, it looked like a billionaire's noble turn. To Lucas, it was a quiet apology for everything vengeance had cost him. Harold entered, holding a brown archival envelope. "I found this in the old storage vault," he said. "It's addressed to you." Lucas frowned slightly. "From who?" Harold handed it to him carefully. "From Madison." For a long moment, Lucas just stared at the handwriting. Delicate, feminine, painfully familiar. The envelope was dated years ago from the early days of their separation. He opened it slowly, the paper fragile with time. Her handwriting flowed across the page with the same grace her voice once carried. "Lucas, I don't expect forgiveness. I was blinded by vanity, by pride. I wanted the world to see me the way I couldn't see myself, as someone powerful, beautiful, untouchable. You gave me love, and I turned it into shame. You offered peace, and I mistook it for weakness. I destroyed what was good in us long before I walked away. If there's any mercy left in this world, I hope you find peace, even if I never do." Madison. His fingers trembled slightly as he folded the letter. The ache it stirred wasn't new. It had just been buried deep enough to forget its shape. Harold stood quietly by the door. "What will you do with it?" Lucas looked out the window, the city bathed in fading sunlight. She wrote this before everything fell apart, he said softly. Before the scandal, before the ruin. Yes, Harold replied. Lucas's gaze lingered on the horizon. She understood long before I made her pay. Harold nodded slowly. So, what now? Lucas slipped the letter back into the envelope, sealing it once more. Burn it. Harold hesitated. Are you sure? Lucas turned to him, his voice steady but laced with weariness. If I keep it, I'll keep the pain. Some memories don't deserve altars. When Harold left with the envelope, Lucas remained by the window, the city glowing beneath the orange dusk. The faint reflection of his father's portrait behind him seemed to watch silently. The man who had taught him patience and power, but never how to let go. He whispered into the quiet room, You were right, Father. Power waits, but it also forgives. Down below, the streetlights flickered on, casting a warm halo over the foundation's glass facade. His life, once defined by betrayal, had become something else. Not redemption, not entirely forgiveness, but something gentler, understanding. Later that evening, he drove to a small cafe tucked away in Midtown, the one where he and Madison had once shared coffee every Sunday morning when love still had meaning. The same owner still ran it. The air still smelled of vanilla and espresso. He ordered 2 drinks out of habit, her favorite, a vanilla latte with extra cream, and his, black with no sugar. He sat by the window, placing her cup across from him. The chair across was empty, but he smiled faintly anyway. You'd still complain it's too sweet, he whispered. Outside, rain began to fall again, light and rhythmic, like a heartbeat tapping against glass. He didn't touch his cup. He simply sat there, letting the sound of it drown out the noise of everything he'd become. When he finally stood to leave, he placed a folded check beneath the untouched cup, a donation to the cafe's renovation fund, signed Grant Foundation. No name, no recognition, just quiet closure. That night, as he stood on his balcony overlooking the glowing city, wind threading through his hair, Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in years. Stillness. The kind that doesn't come from victory or wealth, but from finally releasing what once defined you. He looked up at the stars, their faint shimmer barely visible beyond the city lights. Even broken hearts can rebuild, he murmured. Far across town, in a modest apartment she now rented under her maiden name, Madison sat by her window, holding an old photo from their wedding. Young, laughing, untouched by the world. She pressed it to her chest and closed her eyes. In another lifetime, maybe they would have survived each other. But in this one, silence was their truest form of forgiveness. And as the rain continued to fall over the city that had witnessed their rise and ruin, both of them, apart yet connected by memory, finally found what they'd both been chasing all along. Not revenge, not love, but peace.